Joining me now is former Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Keshi. He is in Abuja. Ambassador, thank you for making time to be with me today. We did see this coming, right? More membership in the NATO, even though it will take about a year for NATO and Finland to eventually become members. How does this change the landscape of the war and relations in Europe?
I'm not sure. By the way, good evening and thanks for having me. I'm not sure it will change the landscape in Europe immediately. But I think this goes back to some conversation we've had in the past when I keep maintaining that for some of those states around Russia that have tried to join the European Union and NATO, it was because of the overbearing behavior of Russia. And now the Ukraine war has provoked or instigated Finland and Sweden, to see the danger apparent if they are not protected in one way or the other, should in case Russia decides to attack any of these countries. And by the way, there was a documentary made by CNN I think on Saturday night. I think it was on the Finnish preparation in case of any attack. You will see that for long years, over 70 years, Finland has been living in apprehension that Russia could attack. And they've been making preparation, building huge bunkers under the ground in case there was an attack. And so at the end of the Russians must hold themselves responsible, for the expansion of NATO, because they created fears among neighboring countries because of their overbearing attitude. And the decision of these two countries who want to be members of NATO is a clear example, typical example. And so for those who are arguing, against, for those who are supporting, saying that, NATO provoked this war and the rest of it, I think they should be realistic enough to admit that the behavior of Russia did not itself help. The fear it created among neighboring states, particularly former Soviet Union, has been responsible for their desire to seek protection elsewhere. And for them, the only protection they can get is from NATO.
Yeah, indeed. And I remember the Swedish Prime Minister saying yesterday that this is for Sweden's security. I mean, the membership for NATO is for Sweden's security.
Absolutely.
President Vladimir Putin yesterday said that following his conversation with the Finnish president, who called him on Saturday night to inform him of his decision, that this would be a mistake. Do you think that Finland, at least which shares a closer border with Russia than Sweden, is currently under threat as well? You talk about, the preparations that we're making in case, of an attack, and Russia building this atmosphere of fear in the region. Do you think that Finland currently is under threat by Russia?
Look, for so many years, both countries, particularly Finland, have maintained neutrality. They have maintained maritime neutrality, in particular with the Soviet Union, because they share a large border. They have a long, sea in between them. And so certainly the fear of Russia and the fact that if anything happens, they will certainly need some help, unlike Ukraine that is not a member. And by the way, let's also be realistic. For so many years, Finland, Sweden, they have virtually cooperated with NATO. They have conducted military exercises, together. And in fact, during the start of this war, they have actually done some military exercises together in case of, as we say in this part of the world, any eventualities, So it is not something strange or something unexpected, but this has been instigated or the process made faster by the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, it did seem inevitable, didn't it? And then again today, President Putin says there's no real threat if Sweden and Finland join NATO, but he says Russia will respond if NATO bolsters military infrastructure in the new Nordic members. Sweden mentioned yesterday one of the bases for which it would be joining NATO would be that there will be no military bases in Sweden. You think it's feasible in the near future?
Look, what we should bear in mind is Article 5 of NATO, which says that an attack on one country
is an attack on all.
It's an attack on all. So whether there is delay or no delay, or whether the Russians like it, or whether the Swedish, whether military infrastructure is placed in Sweden or in Finland at the end of the day, should the Russians attack any of these two countries when they become members of NATO, definitely NATO members will react collectively. And that's obvious. And I'm sure that, look, let's be realistic. No matter what we say of Putin today, he himself must be considering that some mistakes have been made, because for Finland, and particularly Finland and Sweden, to want to become members of NATO after close to 60, 70 years, simply as a result of this war in Ukraine, he must at least take responsibility that they created the atmosphere of the changing dynamics that has encouraged the two countries, particularly Finland, to want to apply to be a member of NATO.
Now, one of the reasons Russia did invade Ukraine is because of Ukraine's intentions to join NATO. Well, that has been abandoned now. But with Finland, which shares a closer border with Russia, this is a long shot, but do you think that Russia could invade Finland as well, seeing that Finland is making moves to join NATO? And this was one of the reasons that it invaded Ukraine, because it said, this was too close, to its own area of sphere of influence.
I don't think that Russia would. Well, look, at the start of this whole crisis, many of us were confident that the Russians would invade Ukraine, and they did. But I think the dynamics are different here. Look, Ukraine was a member of the former Soviet Union. And they've had this relationship with some Russian-speaking Ukrainians in there, particularly in the Donbass area and things like that. But as against Sweden, Sweden has never been a member of the omnibus Soviet Union of the past. And so Putin may not be, so
I think you mean
worried.
Finland, not Sweden. I think you mean Finland.
Finland. I don't think that Finland, I don't think that Putin would be so worried about Finland, despite the closeness, the border that they share together. It's a different situation between why he went to war in Ukraine and the situation, the developing situation in Finland. Completely different situation.
Well, interesting to note. And I know the Ukrainian forces have been making it to the border with Russia in Kharkiv. They consider that a victory on its own. But there have also been reports of Russian forces retreating. Many would consider this a good sign. But for many analysts, this might be Russia retreating to return stronger. Am I right?
Absolutely, you are right. Look, this is good news for the Ukrainians and for all the supporters of Ukraine. But the fact is, two things we must bear in mind. The more defeat that Russia suffers, the more Putin is determined to destroy and to go into Ukraine. Look, Russia considers itself as a major world power. Russia sees itself as one of the powers that control the world. And it's not going to allow a small Ukraine to humiliate it. And this is why I keep hoping that somewhere along the line, the rest of the world will be able to, to bring both sides together before Russia loses its, really goes mad and begin to, do more harm or damage than it has done already. So for Ukraine, this is good news. This is an interesting development. Every inch of territory reclaimed by Ukraine, it's a plus for Ukraine and the people of Ukraine. They need such good news. They need such inspiration. But we should also be worried as to how Russia will react at the end of the day. This is a long, drawn-out war. Russia is not going to give up. Ukraine is not prepared to give up. But the disadvantage of Ukraine is that Ukraine does not have all the military might and power. So it's just taking it one city on, one day at a time, one city at a time, and trying to liberate its country. But certainly it's a good development. But look, this is a long, drawn-out war, and the Russians are not going to back out. And quite frankly, they might actually be retreating in order to relaunch their attack, or they might focus on the Donbass area, which remains their, the area where they want to focus on.
Indeed, Ambassador. Thank you so much, Ambassador Joe Keshi, for joining us on the program. Thank you for your analysis. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks.